This episode of The Clear Out was recorded on the 27th of February 2024 at home in Wicklow. And in it, I talk about a few different things, but mostly it's these three things. I talk about proportional responses to whatever is going on in the world right now, proportional responses to whatever we feel embattles us. I talk also about Kenneth Branagh's 2021 film Belfast in some detail and reflect on the stories we want to tell and how we make sense of ourselves. And that kicks me into talking about a project I'm starting to work on myself and how I'm thinking about that story and the way to tell that story, which is again in that area of contextualizing one's life, contextualizing one's self, and what may or may not be important in that attempt. So that's what's coming up. I hope that sounds like it might be of interest. You've come this far. Can you hang in for the rest of the episode? Only you can answer that question. But if the answer is yes, I will see you around the corner. Cheers.
Ooh, not gonna change my mind, leaving the dream behind, keep my moji inside.
Hi, my name is Dara Clear, and you're listening to The Clear Out. You're very welcome. It's so lovely to have your ears, to have at least part of you with me on this journey today. Would you believe, for the third recording day in a row, so the last 3 weeks, each time I've recorded, I look out the window and I see rain. And it's been a very similar kind of rain. I know last week it deviated, but I've got the constant drizzle, which is appropriate for a man of my age. I've got the constant drizzle outside. Again, I kind of like it. There's something about the way that water sits, that water that falls from the sky, the way it sits on the grass and sits on the trees, the branches of the trees, and drops that sort of fine film of water on everything. It's kind of lovely. Although I don't especially want to be out in it, although I was earlier. I had a very, very cold swim. The temperature has dropped off the last couple of days, so of course that affects the water. Anyway, that's enough of that. Thanks very much. I'll have to change the name of this podcast to The Weather Report. The Weather Update with Dara Clear. How are you? As always, we have to start there, don't we? How are you? That's a question I sometimes dread being asked, because you don't want to know is how I feel. How are you? No, don't ask. Let's not go there. Let's pretend that has no relevance to this conversation, to this exchange. Let's not look under the hood. Let's not lift up the carpet and see all the dirt that has been swept under there. That will not serve us right now. But I do generally start the podcast with that question. How are you? More and more I hear people expressing exasperation, exhaustion, a type of sickness tinged fatigue at the state of the world. And I share that awareness and that perception, but I try not to stay in that place of feeling beleaguered, feeling afflicted, feeling assaulted, because it just doesn't help, does it? And it's a tricky line to walk, because the attempt is to walk the line of being aware, being cognizant, not trying to shut things out as such, but to be very accepting of how little impact we can have on the larger picture, the larger scheme of things. I iterate a version of this sentiment so often on the podcast that if you're a regular listener, you might be going, okay, yeah, I think we've established that this is your position. But I don't think there's any harm in putting these things out there regularly, because what I'm feeling instinctively more and more is that the goal is to remain calm. What do you think of that? What do you think of that as a proposition? The goal is to remain calm, to try and think clearly, to try and respond thoughtfully. The sun has just come out. Would you believe it? The sun has just broken through. I can see the drizzle has eased, but I can see blue sky. I can see bright, shining cloud moving over the tops of the trees, and above that cloud, at the top of the window that I'm looking out of, blue sky. And the grass in the garden is lit up by that light, and it's making the rainfall on the grass sparkle. It's kind of beautiful, and that applies to the tops of the trees in the garden as well. This truly is #blessed. Sadly, our time at #blessed is now on the clock. We have to leave, and that is very unfortunate. It was somewhat foretold. We've been here for just over 3 years, and it's been just such a lovely place to spend our lives, regardless of what's been going on in our lives. It is just a great, great place, and it's a terrible shame and unavoidable, but we have to leave. So who knows where we're going to fetch up. We have a little bit of time to play with, thankfully, but I don't know what comes next. If it'll be #blessed 2.0, will I refer to this place as #cursed? It remains to be seen, but as ever, I'm trying not to lose sight of what can still be enjoyed. Also part of my broader philosophy of coping and finding moments to be grateful for day by day. Sometimes that stuff, I hear myself say stuff like that, and it can sound really naff and sort of trite and platitudinous, I suppose. What I hope always is that when I say it, you can feel or hear, or you have enough of a reference point or a frame to go, I know that's coming from a thoughtful place. I know it's not just that. It's not just a sound bite. It's not just something cute. And to go back to what I was saying before about the aspiration to calm down, to remain calm, not in a repressed, suppressed way, not in a way of denial, but in a way of understanding I'm really not going to contribute much positive if I'm freaking out and getting hysterical about everything and dwelling in a reactive, highly emotive or emotionally reactive place. That said, it's important to know when it's necessary to let off some steam, when it's necessary to scream. I don't think that's contradictory. I mean, that's just about being tuned in to the vessel, about being tuned in to the machine, about going, there's a need to cry at the moment, or there's a need to shout, there's a need to rage. And that's moving with what's in you, and that's responding to what your whole system is responding to. And certainly when I consume what other, what maybe people who are really in the wellness space, like professional practitioners, whether it's in psychology or physiotherapy or alternative practices, but people who are really, that's where they're living their lives. I mean, I consider myself sort of lo-fi, slightly off to the side, wellness advocacy adjacent, because there are too many other interests I have that I feel don't let me remain solely in that space. However, my desire or my interest in the wellness of not just myself but of others, and in the wellness of the world I live in a way that's always informing where I'm coming from. So that maybe makes me slightly less, slightly more than adjacent. What I was going to say though was the output and the commentary of other more explicit wellness advocates and practitioners. What I'm hearing is, a lot of talk around dysregulation, a lot of talk around nervous system, shock or nervous system conflict, people's nervous systems being just impacted by this world we live in and this moment we're living through. And I just feel intuitively I get that. Intuitively I feel it. And I don't generally spend a lot of time in that space. I think a lot of my own practices keep me fairly stable. Now, I'm saying this on the back of, it's only last month where I had a very tough start to this year, and I spoke very explicitly and dedicated an episode to exploring my own, mental health battles and depression battles and, all of that. But, because I believe that that's useful. It's certainly useful to me to talk about that stuff and put it out there. That helps me get perspective. It helps me look at things a bit more proportionally and respond proportionally. And that idea of responding proportionally, I think, is really central to how I approach whatever I'm dealing with in life. And I mean, arguably, that's a very it's a very martial arts based idea. Maybe it's a very Eastern philosophy based idea. A little bit kind of Zen adjacent. Okay, adjacent is a very handy word to not commit fully to things. Yeah, I'm that adjacent. I'm kind of in that area, but not that. But the idea of a proportional response, there's a clear implication of balance in that. So, in karate, for example, when sparring, it's not all out war. It's not all out destruction of your opponent. It's usually back and forth skirmishes, back and forth point scoring. The type of karate that I practice, Shotokan, in practice and certainly in competition, it's a semi-contact sport. Now, when the blood runs hot, people get hit and hit hard, and I've seen plenty of heavy contact and received some and probably given a bit, not too much, I think. It's not really my wiring, but I've had some good scraps. Probably doesn't quite do them justice, because they've been a reasonably proficient level of karate that's been engaged in some of my more memorable exchanges in the dojo, in the kind of karate training hall, with some good fighters, male or female. but a proportional response. Like that's about control. And that's one of the things I continue to resist and have always resisted about MMA, mixed martial arts and UFC, particularly the kind of highlight platform for that competition, that sport. I just think the proportional response idea is not there when someone is kneeling over a fallen opponent and applying repeated full force blows to their head or elbow strikes and, basically making a mess of somebody's head or, leaving them covered in blood. To me, that's not a proportional response. That's excessive. And to me, that's a breach from traditional martial codes. And I don't care for it, and I don't value it, and I don't respect it. Even though, as I have said many times before, I have great respect for the skill set of those fighters. I have great respect for their demonstrated courage to step into that space when things are given license to be so excessive. That's a dangerous space to step into. I wouldn't fancy my chances. I remember a South African instructor I occasionally trained with in Melbourne. Real old school, hard, tough karate man, from a kind of a lineage of hard, tough white South African karate practitioners. And I remember him saying to me one time, "Dara, would you like a crack at Conor McGregor?" And I was thinking, not really. I don't think I would. Because I think Conor McGregor would knock me out in 2 seconds flat. But, that is the most likely outcome. But I would generally underrate myself in terms of my own skill set. And it's certainly not getting any better at this age and with the level of practice that I engage in and the type of practice that I do. It's really my own stuff and teaching kids. I'm not getting ready to step into the octagon. But yeah, the proportional response idea it's huge. To me, it's huge. As a general philosophy of how we cope with stuff. And if we find ourselves responding to things or reacting to things with disproportionate heat, with disproportionate upset, with disproportionate distress, then to me, that's a very important area to look at and go, why? Why is this pitching me into such a state? Why is it making me respond this way? What is it about this that hits such a nerve or activates such an intense emotional response? And I should apply that to my own. When I find myself battling with a depressive state, which can get extremely dark and extremely self-obliterating in sort of my mental and emotional state, I should be asking myself, why? What is this? What's happening here that has me in such an extreme state of self-abnegation? What am I responding to? Is it fear? Is it a sense of worthlessness? I mean, yeah. In a word, yes, it is those things and more. But luckily, over the years, and I really do consider myself lucky because not everybody gets to escape that headspace or trust that it's survivable. I mean, that's a very important concept as well. I can survive this. And certainly martial arts can teach you that as well. You get a smack in the mouth or a cracked rib or a chipped tooth or a broken toe or finger or a bloodied nose or a burst lip. It's important to go, oh, that's horrible, that sucks, that hurts. Oh, there's blood. Oh, there's pain. Oh, I'm not, my breathing is going to be uncomfortable for a month or two. But it's survivable. It's survivable. And much more important to me, that's just the body. Much more important to me is your sort of inner machine, your inner drive, your inner self-worth. Oh, there's a chicken running across the garden. Is that Bob Ross? Not sure. I didn't know the chicken. It's a solo. One of our 5 chickens just sprinting across the window. Stopped to have a look at me and is now stopping to peck the ground. But much more important is our core sense of self-worth and self-drive. Is that surviving? Does that emerge and go, I'm all good? And does that shake off the punch in the mouth? Does that shake off the split lip? Does that shake off the broken nose? And go, it's fine, I can continue. And okay, those are very, they're very, very, very obvious sort of metaphors. But of course, that could be, do I survive this moment of crisis in my relationship? Do I survive this moment of failure or perceived failure in the workplace? Do I survive this moment of whatever it might be, of dispute in my family, of pressure to secure a home, whatever it might be? Can I survive that? I mean, that ultimately, I think that's the challenge. And the way I think of it is, it's what's, what is the through line? What is the through line of your journey? And if that's like a heartbeat on a, heart monitor, how much deviation is there? Are you kind of keeping yourself pretty steady and pretty solid as you travel through? We all have to find our own way to make that happen. But I think we neglect the importance of that base state at our peril. And it's not about being self-involved or narcissistic or egotistic or constantly prioritizing ourselves. But it is about maintenance. It is about checking in and going, oh, hold on a second, I need to just straighten myself out here a little bit, or I need to address certain areas of deficiency, or certain areas that are under a little bit too much pressure. And that's the right priority at the moment. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with making those kind of decisions. Anyway, there you go. I did not know I was going to say any of that, that is par for the course here on the Clear Out. What I thought I was going to talk about was what? Something a bit more in the area of not the creative process, not the creative process, but something in that area. And it's partly because of what I'm trying to work on myself at the moment. Last night I watched Kenneth Branagh's 2021 film Belfast, which is massively inspired, if not totally, if not practically autobiographical, by Kenneth Branagh's own childhood experience growing up as a young fella in Belfast before moving to England. And it's a beautifully shot black and white childhood story. And we experience this world through the eyes of the young Buddy, which I guess is the proxy for Branagh. And he is growing up in early 60s Belfast, in a very hot time politically, with sectarian tensions rising to the boil between Protestant and Catholic communities, Unionist and Republican communities, and I guess it's Branagh's attempt to capture that experience, to capture his experience and the different areas of light and darkness in his childhood. His parents are played by Jamie Dornan and Katrina Balfe. His grandparents by Ciarán Hinds and Judi Dench, who I think were excellent in the movie. Hinds and Dench, that is. Their easy chemistry, their lived-in characters, their fantastic faces, their lovely back and forths. Just lovely actors to look at. Judi Dench is just, God, she's such a class act. Always such an amazing face, such a great voice. The way she's just a great actress. And Ciarán Hinds is lovely as well. He's always really solid. He's just got that big haunted head. And Jamie Dornan is fine, and Katrina Balfe is lovely. Good as well. Playing young, under pressure parents with a lot going on in their lives, and the film is, to me, it was a mixed bag. It wasn't quite one thing nor the other. I felt partly what Branagh wanted was maybe to tap into this relationship with the escapism of cinema and movies, something I can totally relate to. Maybe almost tipping into cinema paradiso levels of romanticism. Maybe he could have tipped it into more, magic realism. But he was also trying to capture some of the real, genuine danger and darkness and nastiness of the Troubles in Northern Ireland, in Belfast at that time. But he couldn't quite it felt like he couldn't quite bring himself to commit to either. And so I felt the film just fell a little bit between both. And I couldn't quite put my finger on what would have made it more successful, because he couldn't really fault the performances. He could have leaned in more to the difficulty with which the young son would struggle to capture that danger. For me, the most successful scenes were the more intimate family moments, and the less successful ones were trying to drop in the social political context. And sometimes there were moments of script that were way too expository and way too written for, my sense was written for a non-Irish audience, because the vast majority of Irish audiences would know the subtleties and the tensions and the horribleness of what went on in Northern Ireland. But I felt like Branagh was making concessions to a non-Irish audience, and things were just a little bit too on the nose. Certain line readings just made me cringe. I wish maybe he'd had a bit more courage in that area to just be a bit more nuanced, a bit more subtle, and have it just a bit more sort of integral to the characters. And yet, I found myself very moved at the end. The final scene, really, I found very effective, and just the dedication at the end. Because I know people who had that experience of having to get out of Belfast as children. Like, their families made the decision, like, no, we can't be here. It's just too dangerous. We've got to get over to Donegal, or we've got to get over to England. It's just not a place to raise a family. And I have enormous empathy, and I feel, I don't know, I feel I've always sensed the cost of that, like the cost of having to leave, and the parents making the decision to go, nah, this is no place for our children. We're not going to run the risk of them being caught up in violence, or be the victims of sectarian hatred. There were notes of that, and particularly at the end, that I think Branagh, he successfully captured it, even if in a slightly sentimental way or romanticized way. It was very good. And the photography, I didn't check who the cinematographer was, but it's shot beautifully in black and white. It really is. It looks gorgeous, and there are some very very light and funny and entertaining moments, and one fantastic line reading from the Buddy, played by a young actor called Jude Hill, in relation to washing powder, which that was kind of the high point of the movie for me, which came close enough to the end of the film. A distraction for me was an over-reliance on Van Morrison songs. Van Morrison's Warm Love, a song I really like, was used, and that was gorgeous, but some of Van Morrison's less lovely, less brilliant, less classic songs were just like if it was a jukebox Van Morrison musical, I don't know, it just felt really, I don't even need this. I think maybe original music, an original score might have served it better. Although obviously Branagh's using Van Morrison as a proud Northern Irishman, but it wasn't always era appropriate. So I just feel some kind of mediocre Van Morrison material on the soundtrack just contributed to the sense of, if this is a MOR the soundtrack, it kind of fits with maybe the pitch of the film as well. And that's not to invalidate that you can make great sort of family movies that aren't edgy, that are the director or creator's attempt to capture their childhood. I'm thinking of that John Boorman film, Hope and Glory, isn't it? And then there's a lovely English movie about West Indian immigrants with, I think, Delroy Lindo at the head of the family, and they're cricket mad in London in whatever it is, the 50s or 60s, and that captures something lovely, as well. And I just feel Branagh sort of, I can't think of the name of that film, I have to look it up. Something about, I'm sure Oblivion might be in the title. I'll look it up while I'm chatting here. But I just think Branagh missed a little bit of that magic. He just missed a little bit of capturing something to single out the very distinct bond and glue that the family enjoyed. It was just a little bit too fragmented, or just unsuccessful, I think, in that area. And maybe he's aware of that, and maybe he was never going to capture that, or maybe that wasn't his intention. But just bear with me 2 seconds. I'm going to find this movie because it's one that's well worth checking out. Right, see how far I have to go back. It was definitely Delroy Lindo, and it was called Wondrous Oblivion. That's it. Wondrous Oblivion. Yeah. Oh, it's a Jamaican family moves in next door to a white family, and the Jamaican dad helps the young fella improve his cricket game. 2003, so just over 20 years ago, directed by Paul Morrison. Go find that if you can. A lovely movie. So what it got me thinking about was how we make sense of our lives and how we understand ourselves in the context of our lives. And as creative people, particularly, what do we want to say when we make that attempt? What are we trying to use to put down the template or the guideline for that attempt. And in Branagh's case with Belfast, it was a very finite period of time, and just very, I don't want to say a scattergun approach or a scattershot approach, because that's an injustice, because he's a more skillful filmmaker and storyteller than that. But I can't help but think, like, that's a guy who left Belfast as a kid, and he's looking back with a certain romanticism. And I think if you're familiar with the history of Northern Ireland, it's very hard. It's very hard to offset that darkness. It's very hard to offset the tragedy and the bloodshed and the violence and the entrenched hatreds. It's very hard to offset that with something sunny and light and romanticized, the childhood flashback, and there was no question that it was partly a love letter to Belfast, and I have no issue whatsoever with that. And the film opens with photography from contemporary Belfast, and then does this nice thing of peering over a wall, and it's black and white, and it's the past, 1961, I think. Just a little trick, very obvious, but as I say, the black and white photography is really, really lovely. And Branagh is he's not Ken Loach, for God's sake. Like, he's not a social realist. Like, he is an entertainer in a very kind of classical mode. And there were a lot of things to like about the movie. A lot of nice moments and a lot of nice observations and period detail, which were successful, definitely. And so in that regard, the movie does work. But I guess I just wanted more. I wanted the weave through through those worlds to kind of come together more successfully and kind of cohere more successfully. And yeah, that, to me, there just wasn't quite enough there. But the question I was asking before, though, was like, well, what do we do? Like, what do we do? What are we taking from that part of our lives? And how do we kind of join the dots? And how do we understand ourselves using those different periods of our lives? And, are we always a product of the past? Are we always this sort of accumulation, this conglomeration of different moments, different experiences, different key steps in our personal evolution that bring us to now? And how relevant or how worthwhile is it to constantly contextualize and go, to constantly contextualize and drop a frame of causality or of sort of psychological, emotional understanding, like that frame of, oh, well, I'm like this because of that. I'm asking that pretty rhetorically, because it's clear, if you've spent any time listening to this podcast over the last couple of years, almost 3 years, that is something that I do value. And that kind of mission statement of mine to declutter and clarify and connect, that's always about sort of personal excavation and exploration. And I try to do that in a way that is not neurotic or solipsistic or narcissistic. It's not about constantly putting myself at the center of the frame, but my desire is always for greater understanding that will lead to a more functional, fulfilled self who's better able to make the most of what's available in the moment. And again, I don't think that's a bad aspiration. And yeah, I'm thinking about this a lot at the moment because I am, as I mentioned last week, I've begun work on what I hope will be a successful long form writing project, which is going to be something in the area of autofiction, something in the area of making sense of myself and drawing the line from childhood to now with overlapping time frames. I was speaking to a friend about this just the other day, and he was like, oh yeah, well that sounds like a ring narrative where you don't necessarily start, it's not chronological and linear, but you're revisiting moments, responding from a moment now that chucks you into the past, responding to something in the past that chucks you back to this moment. And I think that is generally my mode anyway, the way I connect things. It's it's a little bit like Tom Cruise in Minority Report when he's piecing together someone's life and their backstory leading up to a crime that they haven't yet committed, because that's the premise of that Spielberg film from, what is it, 2001? Maybe it's a bit later than that. That Tom Cruise heads up this precog unit that catches people before they've committed a crime, and the laws allow them to to indict and penalise them then, because, well, we know what you were about to do and we've caught you before you've done it, but you were still going to do it, so away you go. It's I actually think I really like that movie. I think it's a very successful execution of a very clever idea. And as I've mentioned before, this kind of, it wasn't actually the breakout Colin Farrell performance, but it really announced Colin Farrell as a young actor who was going to take a very big swing. He just met Tom Cruise head to head without breaking sweat, without batting an eyelid, and you're like, whoa, the chops on this guy. I've never not admired Colin Farrell for that reason. I'm like, yeah, good for you, man. Get out there, get into it. Not a backward step. But yeah, so I'm writing about my childhood at the moment. I'm revisiting moments, and I'm not being too fussy. I'm not trying to go, where did it all begin? What was point A? What was point B? What was point C? I'm just sort of intuitively following where my writing brain wants to go, and I'll see as I proceed if that is being successful or not. But I know what I'm interested in. And it's the challenge is how successfully I'm going to make the connections and produce something that's legible and in some way fascinating or interesting. And I think the pressure I'm putting myself under is, it's not that I'm interesting. It's that hopefully I can capture something of what my experiences and perceptions were and contextualize them in a certain way and capture that successfully in writing, so that people go, oh yeah, there's something there that I can relate to. There's something that opens up my imaginative space or my emotional or psychological space that is turning on lights of recognition, of fellow travelling. That's often how I think of it, that we're all sort of fellow travellers, finding our own way. And I just think that there's, like, when I'm my quest to sort of to make sense of things, it's it's not a template for everyone. It's my own template. It's my own understanding or recognition or attempt to capture, well, these are the things that have remained important to me. And I can draw a line from this to that and back to that and over there and maybe back here. And it helps me go, oh, that's why this stuff remains at the forefront of my concerns, or remains at the forefront of how I contextualize myself and understand myself. And it's definitely going to be a challenge, but I'm enjoying the process at the moment. Hopefully I will continue to enjoy it and get to an end point where I'll have something that's worth putting out there. Okay, do you know what? I'm going to finish here today. I just feel like let's have a short one. And I hope you found something of interest here. I mean, what were our three main talking points? Proportional responses in relation to remaining calm. That touches on stuff I was talking about last week. Obviously, going into Belfast, Kenneth Branagh's film, in some detail. And then this idea of how do we make sense of ourselves? And it's, I didn't really go into too much exploration of that idea. Of course, it's about our own journey, but then it's also about our relationship to, so much of it is about our relationship to other people, the relationships that define us, the relationships that we continue to try and negotiate, the negotiation of our personal aspirations, the world we live in. I mean, there is a connective thread to that idea of proportional response, calmness, negotiation of self, negotiation of the world. Everything is interconnected. We don't live isolated lives. And I know that's a theme that I spoke about last week with, talking about AI and the assault of technology, the invasion of technology, the takeover of technology, and how that has fractured us all and individuated us all. That is, of course, an isolating effect. But we're in that world. We're in that world and we're interacting with that world. So in that regard, we're not isolated from that. I'd love to be isolated from that. I'd love to turn my back on the world and just live silently, quietly, in some sort of pastoral setting, rural setting, with a happy, wife and daughter in my life, and pursue the things I want to pursue. That's a dream. Sometimes my wife thinks I'm living that dream, that I'm living in a bubble. But it's not the case, I can assure you. Anyway, that's it. That's all I've got today. I hope you enjoyed what you heard. I hope you'll come back and listen again. And I hope you're doing well. You can come and do some mindfulness work with me if you like at Camerino Bakery at IMA, the Irish Museum of Modern Art. I'll be there for the next 3 Wednesdays, 12 o'clock. It's a 50-minute drop-in class, and the sort of stuff I talk about, I put into a more physical practice, breath work, energy flow, alignment, and just dropping in some concepts to play with, to give tools, mindfulness tools, to help achieve that calmness that I aspire to, that I believe sends you back out into the world in better shape to deal with whatever comes your way. So yeah, that's the next 3 Wednesdays, 12 o'clock, Camerino Bakery at IMA in Kilmainham in Dublin. And otherwise, throw me some love in the online space. Social media, you can get me in the usual places: Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. A review, a comment, a share, a like, a subscribe. I welcome all of that. And if you're really motivated by what I do here on this podcast, if you really get something from it, consider becoming a Patreon at patreon.com/theclearout. And for the price of a cup of coffee, cup of tea, a turmeric latte, if you like, you can support this financially. And if you can't afford it, don't worry about it. Just listen and enjoy and spread the word, because that helps enormously. Okay, that's it. I'm out. Thanks for listening. Mind yourselves. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.